Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, it's a mega mailbag. We answer your questions on free agency, prospects, the front office, changes to Citi Field, and much more. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today, and here's your reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get all of your podcasts. All right, I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined, as always, by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. It's Halloween as we sit here and record this, as you fill up your bag with candy. We are emptying our bag of mail. That's right. This episode belongs to you as we turn the show over to the listeners. It's a mega mailbag episode. But before we get started, I'm told Joe has one piece of business to discuss that I am not privy to.
It's a good thing. So, hold on. If you're watching on YouTube, you see me reaching back. And to describe to everyone, this is my trophy for winning the scoreboard.
It's a nice one.
It is a nice trophy. It feels like I just won like my Babe Ruth league again.
That's exactly what it looks like.
It's perfect. But to describe for those listening, and if you are listening on podcast, we appreciate it. Also, make sure you check out the YouTube. It's got Mets blue here in the middle. We got the SNY logo. We got the Mets logo. We got a little batter here. And at the bottom, scoreboard champion. That would be me, not Connor. That would be me. And there was also another thing, which, Connor, I want to ask you about this. It's got a gift card here. It says to Joe from Connor, if you could read. So it's my understanding is this is from you for your 2007 Mets collapse in the scoreboard. So yes, so the award has finally come in. I am your scoreboard champion, and that trophy will be on the line again next year. It is going to be like the Stanley Cup. There will not be a new one. I don't get to keep this forever unless I beat you next year. And I was told by Jeff that if you do beat me, our producer Jeff, that if you beat me next year, it is also my responsibility to ship it to you. On my dime, probably. That's crazy.
But you came out the loser here, so go on.
I think so. But yeah, really excited to get it and appreciate Jeff hooking that up for us. And it was a fun year to do the scoreboard, and look forward to doing it again next year. But had to show off my winnings, and also thank you for falling apart, and that worked out for me.
I have two thoughts. One, your victory lap, well earned. No argument there. Two, the first thing I noticed when you held it up is that it was made to be reusable, which it just makes so much sense. It doesn't have your name on it. It doesn't have the year on it. It is clearly,
I have a year to change that.
You do, by the way, which you absolutely should. And I guess you don't really have to ship it, because I see you at about 4 Mets games a year. I see you at the Queens Baseball Convention. I'll see you randomly throughout the year as well. So congrats to Joe. He's the winner. Thanks to everybody that followed along during our scoreboard contest throughout the entire year. And hopefully that's something that we continue to keep doing, because it's a fun way to look at the Mets props throughout the season, and a fun way to stay current with the state of the team. Even when we moved to the minor leagues eventually towards the end of the year. But when Rafael Ortega was a key member of the scoreboard, you kind of see where it went. With that, let's jump.
We'll never forget 2023. We will never forget.
Yeah, or we'll quickly forget it. Hopefully 2024 is just that much better. With that, we will jump into our mailbag questions. We got so many good questions. I promise today is going to cover a lot of ground with this Mets team. There's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of serious offseason things addressed. This one I want to start with from Chris, because it's one where you can really only do on a mega mailbag show, because you need the time to plan it out. Not plan it out, but go through it accordingly. He said if there was a 1-game winner, take all championship, and you could put out a starting lineup of any former or current Mets between the years of 2010 to 2023, who are you going with? I think, Joe, the easiest way for us to start with is like the locks, the guys that have, there's not even a argument, a debate, or a contest. So who would you think are the locked in players in the lineup?
So we will obviously do this as a team. We're not going to make our own teams. Pete Alonso is the first baseman because he's arguably the best hitter in Mets history, not just first baseman of the last decade. David Wright at third, I think.
That's an easy one.
Feels like a bit of a lock. Who has played catcher for last decade? I've quickly realized that my memory is not as great as I think it is. Who has played catcher for the last decade? I remember Wilson Ramos was around for a couple of years.
I mean, you're
someone that did well at catcher.
This is like legitimately Travis d'Arnaud versus Francisco Alvarez. I really think so, right? I mean, you look at d'Arnaud had some moments in the postseason for the Mets in 2015. He's had some moments for the Braves. Alvarez obviously is the best power threat we've seen behind the plate since Piazza. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. You're right. Catcher is the one where it's like you can go kind of interesting because you can go with the upside of Alvarez. You could go with the floor of d'Arnaud offensively, and then it's a lot of names unless we're forgetting someone.
Yeah, it's a lot of names. Josh Tolley was in there for a bit, right?
John Buck, legend. He had like the hottest April, I feel like, or May. I forget which month it was.
Yeah, no, he came out the gate scorching. But let's get back to catcher. We'll circle back to catcher. We got Alonso. We got David Wright. Second base, I think, is either like end of 2015 Daniel Murphy or Jeff McNeil.
It's Daniel Murphy.
Daniel Murphy.
It's a win. It's like a one-game postseason need to win. He's had the moments. It's got to. I know. I get it. Yeah. I really get it because you're talking about a batting champ and Jeff McNeil, but it has to be Daniel Murphy because of the moment.
And the clutch factor. Yeah, I'm with you. So I'm good. So we have Alonso, Murphy, David Wright, shortstop.
It's Lindor.
Yeah, it's Lindor. When did Jose Reyes leave?
I thought it was
before that.
I thought that was when he left after 2009. Yeah. I'll double check to make sure, but
yeah, because he debuted 02 or 03, so that would make sense that he left before 2010.
Reyes actually left after 2011. I don't know. It's weird that that's like not in my brain. I always think his batting champ year was 09 when it was 11. I still think it's kind of interesting.
I still think it's Lindor. I
think it is too. This is one of the
30-30 should win the Gold Glove this year. So I'm going to go Lindor at short. And he feels like he has that big game clutch factor. Like you remember the Subway Series, the 3-home run game. Or was it 2-home run game? Whatever, the multi-home run game.
3-run against the Yankees.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm going Lindor. So we have Pete, Murphy, Lindor, David Wright. Outfield. Who's been good in the Mets outfield?
You got to go Cespedes.
Cespedes and left. We got Beltran was still really good for a little bit before the end there. So Beltran, I think, clicks in an outfield spot. This is great podcast. Me just thinking in my head of Mets history of the last
I don't
want
to interrupt. I mean, Beltran in 2011 for the Mets at 289, and it's why the Reyes one is actually difficult because in 2011, Reyes hit like 337.
Yeah.
But Lindor's power is probably where you go to unless you because we're building a lineup here.
Is Brandon Nimmo the answer? A leadoff hitter, the get on base for Cespedes and Lindor and Alonso and all these power hitters that we're throwing in the lineup. Is one of the answers Brandon Nimmo?
Am I insane if I'm saying Curtis Granderson's in the conversation?
No, not at all. Granderson's a great choice.
He's in the combo.
I think that's a great choice. Yeah. And he could play maybe a better right field. Like if we're actually making a full lineup, he could probably make a better right fielder than Nimmo or Beltran would. Because I like Beltran roaming around center.
Right. I mean, Granderson, he's got power.
He had a good year. He had good years with the Mets. He was one of the probably more successful signings that the Mets have had over the last few years. So I think we go Granderson. And catcher, I like Alvarez's defense better than d'Arnaud's defense and the power potential. I think as crazy as it's going to sound because he's been in the majors for a year, I think our lineup is Alvarez, Alonso, Murphy, Lindor, Wright, Cespedes, Beltran, Granderson. That's a dangerous lineup.
It is, and you could bat them a lot of different ways. I almost feel like Beltran's leading off on that team. That might sound crazy, but you're thinking about somebody that can get on base at that, and so can Granderson, but you're not going to have Granderson lead off on that team because it's so much star power. I mean, when you look at Beltran, even his final year with the Mets, Joe, he was getting on base at almost a 400 clip, 391, a 34-year-old Carlos Beltran. He was an incredible talent. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could bat them. That would make this question longer, and we'll keep it. You're putting DeGrom on the mound?
I'm thinking about putting Matt Harvey on the mound for one game. How Matt Harvey pitched down the stretch, going into the 8th inning, and everything in the World Series. I think DeGrom was clearly a better pitcher than Matt Harvey was.
But that's not the question. To back up your point, the question is it's one game, and you're thinking of everybody almost at their peak or at least hovering near it in that era. Yeah. Wow.
I think there's an argument for Harvey. I think there's a good argument for Harvey.
There's an argument. Here's what's nuts. There's an argument for Zach Wheeler. There's an argument for Jacob deGrom. There's an argument for Matt Harvey.
Noah Syndergaard, honestly, as bad as things turned out towards the end and obviously post-Mets, like Noah Syndergaard was pretty clutch in 2015 too for the Mets.
But you still, I think Jeff just made a good point of this. You still could use Johan and R.A. Dickey. R.A. Dickey won a Cy Young.
He did. That's true.
Johan threw a no-hitter.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part of the whole thing is who you put on the mound, because there are legitimately, I think, 5 guys that you can make an argument and be right somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the pitcher's tough.
I'll answer it though. I will go with DeGrom because it's DeGrom.
Okay.
I think he's the greatest pitcher I've ever watched for the New York Mets in a full sample. But I get your point, Joe, of the moment and thinking of Matt Harvey.
I'm not going to fight Jacob deGrom too hard. I just wanted to bring another option to the table. I can go with deGrom. Oh, and we're DHing Lucas Duda.
Stop it.
What? Until like this year, he had the most home runs in Citi Field history. So
we gotta find a better DH. It's
like who?
I think I want Reyes in the lineup still. Lucas Duda, man,
on base machine.
He was. It's funny when you look back at Duda. Like this is my favorite thing about doing this podcast is looking back at Mets years, and I've watched way too much Mets baseball in my lifetime, and looking at it now and thinking of how different it was at the time. Like in Lucas Duda, Joe, in 2011, in 2014, and 2015, and I believe 2017, had an OPS well above 800. All of those years. Now, if you look at a guy in a lineup and you go, he's got an OPS over 800, like this is an impact bat. Lucas Duda always had an OPS over 800.
It was just they jammed him in like left field for a while, and that wasn't so good, and he wasn't particularly great at first either. But I think Lucas Duda is squarely in the conversation. Back in the day, I called into, I believe it was MLB Network Radio to like Jim Bowden way back when, trying to pitch to bat Lucas Duda leadoff because he got on base at like, I think he had like a 370 on base or 380 on base or something like that. And I was like, why not? And I got laughed off the air. And guess who was batting leadoff for the Phillies in the NLCS? Kyle Schwarber, which is just like a better Lucas Duda. Yeah, it's just a better Lucas Duda. So I was ahead of my time.
I think they still do that same show.
They might. I have no idea.
You might have to call back and victory lap that as well, honestly. Be like, hey, when I was, 8 years younger than I am right now, you guys laughed me off the air, and I just want to let you know that I was right, and hang up.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's a fun question. That's one where I'd love to see the comments and responses of guys that you would go instead of where we went with it, because I think there's a lot of right answers of how you kind of stack it up. But one that, we were obviously really excited to go through. So, all right, let's get into some deeper Mets stuff. Had to get a question from Steve Miller, of course, on the show. I think we got 2 Steve Miller questions today. Would you have any interest in Garver, Carlos Santana, or Whit Merrifield on a 1 or 2 year deal over the guys you've already discussed, like Rhys Hoskins and Teoscar Hernandez? All three are very different positionally.
They are. When we talk about Rhys Hoskins and Teoscar Hernandez, it's primarily to be a designated hitter. It's Rhys Hoskins can play first if you need him to. Teoscar Hernandez could play a corner outfield spot if you want him to. However, when you think about Mitch Garver and Carlos Santana and Whit Merrifield, I don't really want any of them as DHs, really. And Omar Narvaez is going to be back here. I think more likely than not, he has a player option that I suspect he will pick up. So Mitch Garver, I don't think totally fits. Carlos Santana is an on-base, decent power guy. I think I want more. And Whit Merrifield's kind of can play a few positions. He's got some speed. He's a good player, but I don't know if he's necessarily what the Mets need. Whit Merrifield is like a Jeff McNeil with speed almost, right? Where it's just a contact hitter with very little power that can run and play a few positions. So not the best fits in the world, I would say. But hey, you got to consider everything in the offseason. I think David Stearns needs to leave no stone unturned.
This one from Noel Eisenberg. If the Mets sign Ohtani or Soto in 2024/2025, do you think that will decrease the chances they re-sign Pete Alonso? He had a couple more questions too here, but we'll start with that one. Joe, for me, no. I think they're in a vacuum, all of these things. I think the Mets are not a team that they make decisions anymore of, if we go get a star externally, we're going to lose something internally. I think the Mets are in a spot where they have such a handle on their internal evaluations and valuing a player that they don't go hand in hand. Like, it's one of these situations for the Mets now, I think, and we'll get more into this on the show today. Is it, if they get Ohtani, does it affect Soto and the other way around? Like, yes, that's a totally different stratosphere, but their internal players, I don't think will always be like Alonso. You called him, maybe he could be the greatest hitter in Mets history. It's just a different category of what you're operating in.
I hope it does not impact. The only way that I would say yes would be if they signed Ohtani this offseason and decided to sign Juan Soto next offseason instead of Pete. Yeah, it's a little different. I don't think you could get all three of them realistically under your budget. But no, otherwise, Pete Alonso should be a Met long-term, and you shouldn't let outside players dictate that too much. And if you sign one, which was ultimately the question, if you sign one of Ohtani or Soto, there's definitely room for Pete Alonso. The Mets are going to have some payroll flexibility after 2024. Things start to open up when Max Scherzer's money falls off the books, potentially Justin Verlander's money falls off the books. So there's things that are coming off the Mets payroll sheet. So they're going to have flexibility for the 2025 season that they can be, frankly, as aggressive as they want to in the 2024 offseason, which frankly should be the goal. If the Mets are telling us publicly that 2024, we said it a million times, 2024 is they're going to try to compete, but they're not going to go all in kind of thing. Their vision is 25 and 26. Then that's the time of going all in when the payroll opens back up, and you can maybe sign some premium players and not be at the top of the luxury tax threshold and have to lose 10 spots. Like, Steve Cohen doesn't want to lose 10 spots on the draft order every year for eternity. He doesn't want to pay 90 to 100. I mean, I like to think he doesn't want to pay 90 to $100 million in luxury tax penalties every year forever. So it will open up. So he'll have that capability. But at some point, the spending, I don't even want to say reined in because that sounds extreme, but it's got to be, a little more moderate. And that's where I think the young players will come in, which we're going to talk about some on the show. But the Drew Gilberts, the Luisangel Acuna, Jet Williams, all the prospects that we've talked about a lot on this show are going to have a big impact on how much they need to spend on external players.
Right. I think that's the key, is that the Mets are, like a lot of good franchises, operating in timelines now where, this is the thing. Pete is such a unique case that he's not really a good example of this, but The Scherzer and Verlander trades they're the perfect example of this. There was years left on their deals, and the Mets are operating in a timeline where they think they'll be at their more full power probably in 2025. That's not saying they're not going to compete in 2024. That is not the point. But teams have windows and different kinds of windows. Pete Alonso is kind of immune to timelines because he's a homegrown player in record books. He's not old anyway. It's not like he's old. That's not the case at all. And, so he's a little bit of a different situation. But you see it a lot in football all the time. And you do see it in baseball with small market clubs. They might trade a player that's entering his prime or in his prime because everything else is not matching up for them to compete at that moment. And they might be 3 years away where they think the downside of that player they're trading, that star they're trading, is going to start to trend the other way and didn't match up. And then they have all that money on the books for a really long time. There's also an argument that that's a dumb theory because there's so much unlimited money technically in baseball that it really shouldn't always go that way. But it's a deeper
and it doesn't take much. It doesn't take a ton to make the playoffs at this point. Like, it's something you can accomplish. And I think that's going to affect how some teams operate. A lot of teams are going to be building teams with targets of 86 wins, 87 wins. They're not teams are like, why do we need to spend all this money to target 95 wins when you could win 86 or 87, be a wild card, and just get hot for 3 weeks like the Arizona Diamondbacks did. And now look, they're in the World Series. So I think that is definitely, I agree with you, Connor, that you shouldn't think in those windows so far in advance because it doesn't take a ton to put a team together that can contend.
And it goes back to the sustainability of it. Going out and buying the Verlander and Scherzers every year, and even Marte to an extent, guys like that, we're going all in this 2-year window, where instead having a prospect pool of that are really young and all these guys in our prime, that you set a floor, right? Like you said, like an 84 win floor, like you kind of hinted at, Joe, rather than always going for the 103 win ceiling. You're right, because then you just get in and see what happens. And the irony of all of this, Joe, that I keep thinking on whenever I watch the World Series over the last 2 years is, one, the Mets absolutely clobbered the Phillies team that went to the World Series last year. They clobbered that team all year. This year, I'll never forget their trip out to Arizona clobbering the Diamondbacks. And I'm not saying the Mets were better than those teams, but the reality was during the regular season, the Mets, when they played those teams, clobbered them. And those teams somehow ended up in the World Series. Going back to kind of amplifying your point of find a way to get in, get hot, have matchups, right? Because pitching matchups definitely come into play here, and see what happens. And it's insane, really.
How this conversation went from Ohtani and Soto or Alonso, and it just went to a whole just winning windows and win-loss. But Pete Alonso, I just baseline answer, I don't think signing Ohtani or Soto should impact Alonso. The only question will be if the Mets decide they want to sign both.
All right, this is a good transition from Michael. He asks, is there a chance Acuna or Gilbert break camp with the Mets next season? If not, are there prospects that could reasonably give us a shot at that extra first rounder for winning Rookie of the Year? Thanks. Love the pod. So right away, what comes to my mind, Joe, for the follow-up is that, those are pretty much the two that you would think, barring some wild surprise from the rotation.
His name is Ronnie Mauricio.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah,
Ronnie, yes.
He maintained his rookie eligibility by being held down as long as he was held down. So if Ronnie Mauricio is the Mets opening day second baseman, third baseman, some position Ronnie Mauricio is manning, and he goes and hits 30 home runs, which he has power in the bat. It's not inconceivable. Maybe he is a candidate to be Rookie of the Year. And I do appreciate the idea of targeting that extra draft pick, which we've talked about on this show, that the Mariners got for Julio Rodriguez by carrying him on the opening day roster. However, it's tough. It is tough, I will say. I don't think Luisangel Acuna or Drew Gilbert will open the 2024 season with the big league team.
Same.
With that said, the Mets are now run by David Stearns and not Billy Epler. The Mets do not have a director of player development at this time. So there's no one heading that department. There's a new boss in charge. I don't know how David Stearns will value it, but just in a vacuum, I would be surprised if either of them broke camp. And I would think the Mets' priority would be their development over, let's let them figure it out at the big league level right from day one, in the off chance that they're better than any other rookie in baseball and we could get a draft pick out of it. It's a great question, but I think they'll prioritize those guys' development. Though I do think Drew Gilbert has a chance to come really quickly to the big league level if he's able to go to AAA and hit like he did as a Binghamton Rumble pony. Because unlike Acuna, who struggled a bit in his 30-something games with the Mets organization, Drew Gilbert was absolutely on fire from the second he put on a Rumble Ponies jersey.
And I think this is a topic we'll see a lot, Joe, leading up to spring and into spring. And I think my constant conversation around this will be, if one of these two had the opportunity to break, from spring training and make the team, something went wrong somewhere, whether that's an injury to a mainstay or the Mets didn't do enough in the offseason. And quite frankly, that's inexcusable, in my opinion. Injuries happen, and we know that as Mets fans. But the Mets should do enough this offseason that you're not saying, man, I really hope Drew Gilbert has a hot spring and makes the team.
Yeah, and Drew Gilbert's going to be a non-roster invite anyway. Luisangel Acuna is on the 40-man roster, which maybe helps his case a tiny bit. But yeah, the idea should be for the Mets, even if their goal isn't the whole all-in conversation, which at some point I'm going to stop talking about it. But if the goal isn't that for 2024, that doesn't mean you just leave a gaping hole in the outfield or at designated hitter or at second base or something. Like, Jeff McNeil, maybe he's someone that's on the trade block, but if he is, then you plug Ronnie Mauricio at second. So I would hope they wouldn't leave that type of hole in the lineup that would require you to carry one of those guys on day one.
This is a fun one from Christopher Scholes. He said, if you had to pick one thing to add to the ballpark or surrounding area, what would it be? A, retractable roof. B, multiple bars and restaurants replacing the chop shops. C, cut the prices of food and beverages in the ballpark by 33%.
Well, whoever the vendor is probably hates the last option. I don't think they're too into that.
That's not happening.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening. But hey, when I go to the ballpark, I know I'm getting a hot dog, fries, and a beer, basically. So it stinks that it costs a lot, but it is what it is. So I probably would suck that up. I mean, I don't need a retractable roof. Like, I think it's fine, but like, it's summer in New York. I want to be outside. Give me the bars, give me the restaurants, give me the time to have a day. I'm early to Citi Field anyway, so let me have a whole day at Citi Field and then go in and watch a game.
Far and away, and I'll say largely because why it's B, the bars and restaurants. I know, Joe, you drive to the game a lot. For a very long time, I'd been taking the train to the game, and I still do. And the beauty of driving, and we've done that before over the last couple of years, but not often, is that you can pack up the car with cooler and all those things. You could bring sandwiches and all of that. But when you take the train to the game, it would be nice to be able to sit down somewhere if you get in early and have some food, hang out. Like you said, you can make a day out of it. It would. My closest experience to this was one time I was in Seattle for college football when I used to work a lot of college football trips. And I went to a Washington game for work during the day, and then the Mariners were playing at night, and I had the whole night off because I worked all day. And so the afternoon, I went to the downtown area of Seattle and got to go out and eat and drink and then go to the Mariners game. And it was just a totally different experience. And it sounds so simple because that's the case for a lot of ballparks. But it bothered me because I'm like, as a diehard Mets fan, and I know a lot of it's been out of the Mets' hands and there's more nuance to this conversation, but it is really special when you have an area around the ballpark to hang out where you can go 3 hours before the game, or you can hang out after the game. If it's a Friday or Saturday and you want to go out, go out.
Pittsburgh, that's another one.
I've heard.
I went to Pittsburgh, and it's fantastic. Fantastic park, fantastic views, and the hangout stuff before and after games is fantastic. So yeah, Pittsburgh is one I highly recommend you checking out.
This one from Nick Pauly. What qualities do you believe the Mets analytics and player development departments were lacking in 2023? And how might it improve with new personnel this offseason, Joe?
I don't know how much personnel change there's going to be other than a head of player development. I'm sure they're going to swap out analysts. And while I am into analytics, I'm going to be as transparent as I can be. I don't know nearly what these folks do. So I'm not about to sit here and criticize how analysts and the analytics department, who are way, way smarter than I am, do their job. Player development, in my opinion, I thought took a great step forward this year with Jeff Albert on the hitting side, with Eric Yeagers on the pitching side. You saw the emergence of a lot of pitchers. Christian Scott took a big step forward. Blade Tidwell looked fantastic. Tyler Stewart stepped up in a big way. Mike Vassell is someone that's on the cusp of the big leagues. So on the pitching side, there was a lot of positive stories. You saw what Jet Williams did throughout this year on the offensive side. There was a couple struggles, like a guy like Alex Ramirez was a struggle, who obviously had a tough year for the Mets organization. But from a player development standpoint, I like where they're at from just hitting versus pitching, like just those leads. They need to get the right head of player development now to coordinate the whole package of everything when it comes to when to promote players, when to demote players, how you divvy up playing time. All those things that the head of player development does, like that's going to be a very important job. But I think the Mets player development system in 2023 had as good a year as it's had in quite some time. And it's going to be very important for David Stearns to find the correct person to lead that department, because they've been changing that job as much as they've been changing manager and general manager. And these players can't have messaging changing every single year for what the organization wants. There needs to be synergy. There needs to be consistency. And we've talked about that on a higher level. But within player development, I think the way they've handled it has stunted growth of some players over the last, call it 7 years. But I hope they're heading in the right direction now. And I think they have generally the right personnel there. And I'm very interested to see who comes in and leads that department.
Yeah, I think the consistency aspect is something that would be great to clean it up from the factor of, here's the thing that a lot of people miss with front offices and it's hard to do this in professional sports because of the demands, but with Stearns here, it actually becomes a little easier because of the longevity of his deal and everything along the lines of that. It's so hard to develop a process in a building and a process you can build from and learn from when it's constantly changing. And it could even be at positions like that might not have a ton of power, but they're influencing the people that do have a lot of power. So yeah, Joe, I'm with you all the way on that one. It's something that it's probably a little difficult to track within this moment, but we can look back maybe 2 years from now or 3 years from now and find trends and things that change for the better or get worse. You know, you never know how it'll play out.
Some things are going to go well. Some things aren't. I'm not here to say the Mets have the perfect player development department and everything's hunky-dory, but I think it was a good first year for this group, because that's the thing, is that it was year one. So we're going to revisit this in a couple years, and David Stearns having the length of contract he does, and even though there's high demands, to your point, Connor, you see it in football, which you cover all the time, and it's the same deal in baseball. You're changing out coaches, you're changing out general managers, you're changing out these jobs every 2 years because things didn't go well. All right, well, I'm the new GM of the Mets because you got rid of someone. Well, I don't know your director of player development. I don't know who that is. So I'm going to bring in my guy that I know. And it's just a never-ending cycle that I'm hoping the Mets are able to show some patience here with, even if they don't win a World Series, even if success is a little up and down, don't make a change in 2 years. Don't make a change in 3 years. You have to give it. If I were in charge, which is very easy for me to say from this chair, you'd have 5 years. Like whenever you talk to people, it's like, what's your 5-year plan and things like that. You should get 5 years to build a process in an organization, unless you do something nefarious, I guess. But like other than that, you should get a lengthy period of time to run a team. And I suspect David Stearns is going to get that. So I'm very hopeful that the Mets will have continuity in this department in a way that they have not in a long time.
Absolutely. All right, let's kind of pivot to a fun one to take a break from all of our serious analytical and process conversations that we love to have on this show. This one from Dan B. Sweet and straight to the point. Dan goes, let's hear your top and bottom 3 Halloween candy.
All right, so this is going to be interesting. I don't like chocolate, so
that's insane to me.
Yeah, I don't like chocolate. So top 3, it's Sour Patch Kids, it's Swedish Fish, it's gummy bears, like things like that.
Are you a Haribo guy for gummy bears?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's like a top 3 for me as well.
Yeah, that's my jam, is kind of the more fruit-like candies. And bottom 3, candy corn stinks.
Oh wow, we're so different with candy. It's crazy.
Really?
I love candy corn.
Hate candy corn, and I don't really like chocolate, so I guess just list
anything with chocolate
for bottom 3. Yeah, I just don't do chocolate.
Wow. All right, this is a lot to take in right now here, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Haribo, gummy bears, or Sour Patch. I'll keep them in the same bucket.
Yeah,
just phenomenal, and really the only candy that I still occasionally eat at this point. I like sour gummy worms. Like I'll still dabble in stuff like that. With chocolate, Kit Kat and Reese's are both probably my other 2, like to fill the 3. And it's tough, but you're not alone. A lot of people actually don't like chocolate, and that kind of eliminates like 90% of the actual candy out there.
Which is good, because I don't want to have a lot of candy. It's not the best for my teeth. So
you know, it's a throwback that I haven't had literally since I was a kid, but I have to think about while answering this. Remember the Dippin' Stick? Like the sugar stick that you dip the powder in?
Fun Dip? Was it called Fun Dip?
Was it? Yeah, it is Fun Dip, yes.
Yeah, Fun Dip. Yeah, it was a stick of sugar that you dipped in sugar.
I mean, really, when you think about like that being a thing, it's unbelievable to think about.
I remember getting, like, after baseball games, and
that's
like
when you'd have it.
I would get the little barrel drinks. We call it, there were Hugs, I think was the brand.
Yeah.
And they just looked like little barrels with the foil on top. And then I would get like a hot dog, which I haven't grown up past that. And nothing's changed. And Fun Dip would be my go-to after that. But I have definitely not had that in years. I at some point realized dipping sugar in sugar and then doing the whole thing was probably not the most advisable decision. But it was fun as a kid.
It's so funny. All right, the next one, back to some baseball here. This is from Michael Sen. How many bullpen spots are you willing to give to guys who are flyers/projects? It seems like, especially after Diaz went down, we had too many of those unknowns in our bullpen, and it cost us. Thoughts on knowns versus unknowns in bullpen construction?
So I think the Mets went a little heavy on the optionable relievers last year, which I understood the thought process behind, but sometimes thought process and results don't mesh up.
Right.
So let's think logically of who's in the bullpen next year, because we have to do numbers here. Edwin Diaz is in the bullpen. I'm gonna guess Brooks Raley, they're gonna pick up his option. He'll be in the bullpen. I'll guess Adam Ottavino is gonna pick up his option. He kind of was wishy-washy about it towards the end of the year, but I'd be kind of surprised if he didn't. And so let's call him in. So that's 3. A guy that maybe shouldn't be a lock, but I think is probably a near lock. The Mets are very high on Grant Hartwig. I think he has a high likelihood of being in this bullpen. So if we put it at 4, and then what else do we have? Trevor Gott is still.
Is Drew Smith in this bullpen?
Oh, Drew Smith. Yeah, Drew Smith I hope so. I mean, he's arbitration eligible and projected around $2 million. Drew Smith could come back. Maybe it's you just knock him down the totem pole a little bit and let him pitch his way back into the high leverage spots. I think without question, they need to replace the David Robertson concept, whether that's David Robertson or somebody of similar ilk that is the true setup man for Edwin Diaz, that is closer capable in case something happens to Diaz, where the Mets were fortunate to have David Robertson, obviously, in the first half, because who knows what would have happened if they didn't. So you want to replace that. So that puts you at like 5. And you're really carrying 7 or 8 relievers. So there's room for a couple more. I would get one more sure thing. Andrew Chafin. I think he's a free agent again. At some point, Andrew Chafin at some point, Andrew Chafin has to be a New York Met, or Connor's going to lose it. So at some point, we need Andrew Chafin with the Mets.
I feel like here's what's going to, you know what happens, Joe, whenever I do this with a player? It doesn't happen for like 7 years. And then they
signed
get
Chafin at 38.
And he's so washed. Totally cooked. Yeah.
I mean, that is certainly a possibility. But I would say at least 2 rock solid you could count on relievers. And then from there, we've said this on this show for a couple years now. The Mets employ a big analytics staff. David Stearns comes from an analytical background. You should be using that to find the under the radar relievers and hitting on them. So I would say I would leave a spot or 2 for it, honestly, but I would definitely prioritize getting 2 locked and loaded. They're going to be good relievers. So that way we don't repeat the same bullpen issues that occurred in 2023.
The next one from Drake Mason. What is your ceiling on a Pete Alonso extension? I think 8 for $200 is very reasonable.
I don't think I would do more than 8 years. Unless the ninth,
I think 6 to 7 is what you hope for.
I think that's probably what the Mets want to do, and it's one of those things, right? Like, you want 6, I want 10, let's do 8.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy for us to say, but I feel like when we're talking ceiling, it's not like this is ideally what we would do. This is, all right, we really want to keep Pete. This is the way we're going to do it. I think 8 is probably the number. And what's 200 divided by 8? Like, I'm just thinking 30 million a year. Oh, 25 a year is not going to cut it. You're going to have to make him the highest paid first baseman on an AAV basis. So 8 years at, call it 30 million, maybe a tick above, around 30 a year is where my ceiling is. So 30 times 8, whatever that is.
Right. I mean, you're looking at a deal that is probably going to be about 240 million.
That sounds like a good ceiling for me for a guy like, look, Pete Alonso has his warts. There's no way around it. He's an average-ish defensive first baseman, and that's something that is going to regress. Now, you would think over the length of the contract. The one thing I don't think is going to regress is Pete Alonso hitting 45 home runs every year, 50 home runs. Like, I think that's something that you're not going to be able to replace, really. And he knows New York. He's figured out New York. He can handle New York. There's no questions about Pete Alonso's character going forward. So to me, like, that's kind of my ceiling. 8 years, 30 a year, something like that is kind of where I think I would top out. Ideally, like you said, it's 6 or 7, but can't always get what you want.
Right. And to be fair to Pete, and we are very fair to Pete on this show, we always have been. What's not to be fair about? He's a great Met who carries himself as well as you could ever ask of an athlete. We talk about this on this show, how they need to go get Yamamoto and $200 million, whatever. And trust me, nobody is higher on Yamamoto than the 2 guys on this podcast right now. Like, it's nothing when he's never pitched in the major leagues. But the guy that's going to go down as the greatest power hitter in Mets history, we're like,
tapping
man,
at 200.
Like, don't want to go to 230.
Yeah. No,
ridiculous.
That is a great way to put it. It's the new toy, the grass. You look at the grass on the other side of the fence, and it's just like, oh, well, we could spend money on something we don't already know. When maybe in a way taking for granted what Pete Alonso does for this team.
All right, with that, we'll move to another one. It's crazy how you and I have so many different long-winded conversations about this team that you sometimes forget to look back at things like that. How about this one, Joe? Yeah. And this is, you usually have at least, well, the person asking knew this. You usually have one free agent you want to stay away from each year. And Andrew asked, what is your one stay away free agent target other than Blake Snell? I remember last year, to Joe's credit, he wanted nothing to do with Carlos Rodon. This year, you have been out in front that you want really nothing to do with Snell. Is there anyone else that gives you that feeling? Because it's hard to do that with a lot of different players.
There's a couple, and one is, I think, price point, and one is I'm not 100% sold on this person going forward. I'll go with Cody Bellinger as someone I'm not 100% convinced that if you give him 7 years or 6-7 years. I assume it's going to be in that vicinity, and 150 million plus. Like, there's a very real chance with the issues he's had injury wise that stuff barks back pretty quickly. So for me, Bellinger tops my list. And the second, and this is Mets only. The second one is Mets only. If I were a different team, my opinion may change, but there's no way I'm signing Josh Hader if I'm the Mets. I don't need two $20 million relievers on multi-year deals, and the qualifying offer is going to be attached to him. So Josh Hader would be a stay away for the Mets, but just kind of generally speaking, I think Cody Bellinger is my kind of buyer beware player of this offseason, beyond Blake Snell.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. Another one here, this is from Casey Lane. What was Stearns' history with trading prospects in Milwaukee? The Yelich trade was expensive but successful. So many highly graded prospects nearing promotion. Many highly graded prospects nearing promotion. Can we anticipate him wanting to hold on or use them in a trade for potentially controllable pitching? Maybe a little bit of both, Joe?
Maybe a little bit of both. I do think it's going to be difficult to look back at David Stearns to project what he's going to do going forward, because he was operating in Milwaukee on a mid-market payroll. He is now operating on the biggest payroll in the sport. So it's tough to do that correlation. The Yelich trade, fantastic, headlined by Lewis Brinson, who was a big-time prospect at the time and just didn't really work out.
We saw a lot of him with the Marlins.
I think what's going to be very important is for David Stearns and the Mets organization as a whole to properly self-evaluate their prospects. It's something that Brian Cashman and the Yankees, I give them credit for. They've done a great job over that. Like, a lot of things aren't going great in the Bronx right now, but they've known largely what prospects to sell, because it feels like whenever the Yankees trade a prospect somewhere, you kind of never hear from that person again. And sometimes they get a good player in return. So it's tough to say on his history because he hasn't traded a ton of prospects. It's honestly been more major leaguer for major leaguer for prospect, because that's how he's had to operate within the confines of the payroll that he was allotted in Milwaukee. Now in New York, how aggressive do you want to get? That's the balance of, we always talk about, did so well in Tampa Bay, did so well in Milwaukee. Imagine he could do that, but also sign the top players. Some work out really well. Andrew Friedman, Dodgers. Some don't. Chaim Bloom, Boston. So it's going to be interesting to see how David Stearns' mindset shifts with having money, because it's very easy to say, I don't need to trade my prospect. I could just use the wallet and just sign a player instead. What is the difference in value of the player I'm trading for versus the player I'm signing? And is the value match up with the prospects that come along with it? So it's a big old math equation, and it'll be interesting to see how David Stearns kind of walks that rope.
Milo asks, the Mets Citi Connect jerseys will be revealed sometime during the 2024 season. What do you want to see featured in the design, and what do you not want to see? Joe, we've dabbled in this, but not in a while, because we knew it wouldn't be this year. I think we last talked about this when Citi Connect became a thing in 2022. And it's fascinating, right? Because the Mets obviously have beautiful uniforms and they also have the black alternate uniforms now, where you would think like the Citi Connect could have played with the previous black uniforms, but now that the Mets brought those back, that should be thrown out the window as an option. They have awesome home and away uniforms. I guess I'll start with this, Joe. What base color do you think they're working with? We've seen them wear the blue, obviously, before. Like, there's not really or do they do an ode to a previous New York franchise? The Mets are a really difficult one to figure out, because there's not a ton that you could really go with.
They're very tough, and I don't think you want like an orange base, right? Like, I don't know. I don't hate it
I don't hate it, but it's very delicate process. I'll tell you what I don't want. Like anything, I don't want anything to do with the apple. I don't. That was part of the question. I don't want any, like, I don't want a lot of red in the uniform. I don't want the apple to be like listen, I love the apple at Citi Field, and it's a huge part of what the Mets are. I don't think it needs to be part of the uniform. I wonder if they dabble with the 7 train being something like if there's a subway theme, maybe
they could dabble with that. Maybe the city skyline that was on top of the Shea scoreboard. I believe our friend over at Athletes Logo had done a mock-up, and I think he had it black. It said Queens on the front, and it had like the Shea Stadium scoreboard skyline on top of it, and that looked pretty clean. It's gonna be interesting. I just hope it's not something that like the Red Sox, for example. Like, I get it. Like, it's just so far out of their color scheme that I don't want it to be extreme, but I didn't even realize it was coming. Like, we were going to hear about it this year. So, yeah, tough one, but I'm interested to see what color they go with, because orange is going to, it'd be tough to pull off orange. And if it's not orange, then you're just repeating a jersey that the Mets already have color base.
I'd rather them take the swing and do something totally different that the Mets don't have. That's why I lean orange. And like, I understand it can go really bad. I get that.
Yeah.
But what I don't want is them to do something where they were so safe, because it doesn't matter. The Mets have great uniforms, and they don't wear these enough. They don't wear these enough where you're like, oh, great, these ones again. I like the Rockies one's really unique with the
Rockies. They're one of the best. I
don't like the pants, but the jersey is phenomenal.
Yeah.
The Diamondbacks is really cool. I thought the Marlins, the history behind that one's pretty cool. Yeah. The Dodgers one looks like a Dodgers jersey. Like that's what you want to avoid, is that whole problem with it. I think
you don't want to just make another alternate, basically. You want it to be something unique.
Yes. And I like what you said about, and this was something that Athlete Logos thought too, like it should say Queens on it or something like that. That is because the Mets and Yankees play in New York. So it should be very specific to Queens, where you see, like, this is where I think they will do something down that road. With the White Sox, they did the South Side on it. And it's very specific to the White Sox in Chicago. The Mets should have something very specific to the Mets within New York City, not just all of New York City, because Queens is their home. So that's kind of our thoughts on where they should start. And basically what they shouldn't do is just don't repeat the uniform they already have, and don't be too service level with it, and don't go cheesy with just making it all about the apple. That's just kind of lame. So maybe people disagree. Who knows? All right, this one, and this could be our last question for the mailbag, because this is probably one we have to lay out pretty well. From Ethan. Fast forward 3 years. What are you hoping to see the Mets organization look like to view Stearns as a success? And Ethan drops the nugget, like, outside of a championship ring, obviously. Like, that's too easy.
Yeah. I hope that they have a sustainable flow of young talent coming through, much like the way the Dodgers have, the way the Braves have had, the way the Astros have had, where every year it feels like there's more prospects to come. I don't want to be sitting here and be like, Connor, you wait until 2026 because the Mets top prospect will be there. I want to be like, yeah, that person's coming down the road, but we have this, and this coming as well. I hope there's a yearly supply of young players coming through, where the depth that the Mets are relying on is drafted, developed young players, and not 4A players you sign off the street that are hanging out in Syracuse and come up, like, no offense to the many of the Rafael Ortega, the Jonathan Arauz. Yeah, like those kind of guys. Like,
is that the last time you get to say it on the show?
I'll find a way. He's gonna like hit a home run off the Mets or something next year for some other team. But to me, I think that would be a big sign of success. And then obviously, not counting World Series, like, be a year in and year out playoff team. I don't want it to be 1 year in, 3 years out, 1 year in, 2 years out. It's got to be a near every year occurrence. So even if 2024 is or isn't a playoff year, if we're just doing 3 years down the road, 25 and 26 both need to be playoff years, and you get in the dance, and who knows, it could take you very far.
That's it too. I think the things I'll be keeping an eye on is, this is a big one for me. is internal scouting, where why are you and I on the podcast saying this player should be here and the player's not there, and then the player finally comes up and did everything that you were hoping the player would be able to do to help the team? And I understand, like, Joe and I are the first people to not say we are smarter than the Mets or smarter than all these teams, but internal scouting is a massive issue with this team. It's felt like for a long time. And I'm not saying Ronnie Mauricio would have saved the Mets in the first half of last season or anything like that, but I mean, we had to read for 3 months, it felt like, that Francisco Alvarez couldn't catch and throw a ball back to the mound. And Francisco Alvarez comes up to the big leagues and not only hits the ball 80 miles like we expected, but has a laser of an arm and is literally the entire presence of the pitching staff. Like that.
And top 3 pitch framer, top 2, I believe Trevor May said to us last week, top 2 pitch framer. So this is a guy that, I had people telling me that he couldn't catch. So I went with that information and it was wrong. Ronnie Mauricio comes up and it's just like, he's booting the ball everywhere. He can't play anywhere. Like, he looked okay.
He looked fine.
Like, yeah, he looked more than passable. So I do think they can benefit from not being over aggressive, but being less passive in their development. And when players come up, when it's all right, maybe there's a checkbox left on the list, but it's okay. He could figure it out at the next level. If obviously it's someone that has a laundry list of things to work on, that's a different story. But it's hard for me to imagine that Ronnie Mauricio between June and August when he came up got significantly more big league ready. Like maybe a little, but he also got bored towards the end at AAA. Like that was something I believe Mike Puma wrote for the Post at one point. That was just like, Ronnie's just bored here. Like he's ready for the next challenge. So they need to do a better job, Connor, like your point, self-scouting of when are players ready for that next challenge. And that goes down to single A. That's not just AAA to the majors, making sure you move people from low A to high A at the right time, high A to double A, AAA, and then obviously up to the big. So that whole process needs to get better.
It does. And it's one of the many things, that we'll keep an eye on that would be deemed a success of the organization moving forward. That's not just all about the big league club winning all the time, as important as that is. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV. From inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And of course, remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel. You can watch all of our episodes there or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. Mega Mailbag, always a lot of fun. We'll catch you next week.